Hello and welcome to Prairie Pulse. Coming up a little bit later in the show, we'll tour the Becker County Cemetery Walk in Lake Park, Minnesota. But first, joining me now is Bob Dambeck, former director of television, and I say that begrudgingly, former because he's recently retired from Prairie Public. Bob, thanks for joining us on the show today.
Well, it's my pleasure, John. Hearing formerly, that's the first time I've heard that.
And the first time I've said it. Bob, as we start, tell the folks a little bit about yourself, where you're from, and how you ended up at Prairie Public.
Well, I originally from New Jersey, and went to school in the Midwest, and then got jobs here, there, and everywhere for about 4 years. Before we moved here, my wife and I were working in Las Vegas, and my wife got an offer to come up here from Dennis Falk, the general manager of Prairie Public at that time. As a matter of fact, he pursued her quite a bit. And we came up here on a Labor Day weekend in 1984. We came up here, and it was the most beautiful fall weekend you've ever seen. Now, of course, we left Las Vegas on one of the hottest days of the year, so, 120 degrees. So we decided, well, maybe a change was in order for us. And I didn't have a job when I first came, but Dennis said, would you move up here and work in the television department? I'd been working in public radio, and I said, yeah, I could do that, give it a try. And I was offered a job along with Virginia up here. She came as development director. And I was offered a job working in the television department with no title whatsoever. Just assigned to Larry White, who was my boss at that time, the television manager of Prairie Public. Longtime viewers of Prairie Public might remember Larry. And so Larry kind of didn't know what to do with me, so he had me do a little bit of everything, major league pledge drives to start off with. And then after about 3 or 4 months, he liked what I was doing up here, offered me the job as program manager. And then I was basically in programming for maybe the first 8 years I was up here, a little bit of production, but mostly programming. And then about 1991, I became director of programming and production and got involved in both areas at that time.
Yeah. Well, after a quick almost 34 years later, what made you decide that now's the time to retire?
Well, you get to be 67 and it gets to be time to retire. The job requires a lot of energy. I think I've put a lot of energy into that, and I just realized I didn't have the energy any longer that needed to be put into this position so the Prairie Public could continue to do the great things that it was doing. It's time to hand over the keys, if it were, to that part of the car. And I also have 6 grandchildren, and it's time to spend more time with them.
Sure. Well, 33 years plus you've been with the station. What have you seen change in those 32 years with the station and with the industry?
Well, when my first office, when I got here, was south of town. We just moved into this building we're in now, but they were in renovation. It was south of town, and it was a temporary location, been temporary for about 20 years. So we moved into this building. It was upgraded, and so that's one of the big changes early on, moving into a professional facility. But the other thing has been the technology, and anyone that has anything to do with television will tell you that, both on the programming side with high definition, the production side with, I've never really counted it, but at least 7 different formats since I've been here that we've had either different cameras or different playback equipment, and 4K, 5K, 6K, who knows where it's going to end. And every time those things come up, you're changing equipment, you're changing material, you're losing some of the great shows that you've produced and can no longer be played on the high definition channels. We can put them on our YouTube channel, we can make them available otherwise, but my first German from Russia show, we don't play that any longer on our main channel because it was produced in standard definition. And you can go back to hundreds of shows that we produced here at Prairie Public. So I think the technology obviously has been by far the biggest change. Staffing has been ebb and flow over the years. Funding has been ebb and flow over the years, ups and downs. but I would say that the technology, yeah.
Yeah. Well, Bob, of course, in your early years, let's go there, you did a lot with programming and of course, some with production. Production was probably a little different back then, but talk about some of those, either, you know, Spanish language or Kids Zone or some of those things.
Yeah, well, I was, as I said, more heavily involved with the programming. When we first came, Larry White, who was my boss, as I mentioned, was by far and away probably the most creative programmer that there was in the PBS system at that time, if not now. And Larry taught me a lot of tricks, and we had a lot of fun doing that. And one of the things that happened, well, two things happened. One thing that happened was that we were able to get a little money from a thing called the Ag Grant, which came to us about 1990. At the same time, Prairie News Journal started. We got a Star Stool grant so we could do Hablemos Español, which was our nationally produced Spanish language program. And so we had the Ag Grant, we had Prairie News Journal. That was the other one I was trying to remember. Prairie News Journal came along. So we had this influx all of a sudden in the late 80s, early 90s of production opportunities that we didn't have in my first 7, 8 years that we're here at Prairie Public. So because of that, I got much more heavily involved in production and also kept the programming up until the late 90s, actually, programming and scheduling. But we had these opportunities, and it was just one of those things. I remember Larry coming in my office said, if we get one of them, it's going to be so wonderful. And we got one, and then we got the other, and then we got the other one. He came in and he said, holy, and you can answer the next word. We got all three of them. I don't know what the heck we're going to do. Well, what we did was we hired some staff, but what we did was we ended up doing all of those things. Award-winning Prairie News Journal with Darryl Dorgan, Hablemos Español with the late Val Babb came in and did that. And then the Ag Grant. We had a number of people working on the Ag Grant over the years. It was a grant that we got Quentin Burdick, Senator Quentin Burdick and Dennis were close friends, and Quentin was getting a little bit up there, and he said, I want to do something nice for Prairie Public. And I got this opportunity with Pat Leahy to create this 3-year grant for you. Well, that 3-year grant lasted 12 years, I think, at least 12 years, and allowed us to have money for production equipment at that time, so critical. We switched from Stone Age format. When I first came here, we were still on 2-inch reel-to-reel tape. Only TV station in the city of Fargo, probably in the state of North Dakota, still using 2-inch. We had some 1-inch, and we went all the way up to beta, which at that time seemed like a light-year leap. But, you know, without that Ag Grant, I don't know where we would have been. And we got that, and that really just set the stage for just about everything else that happened in production over the years was that Ag Grant that we got in, I think it was 90 or 91.
Yeah, some of that leads into how you got involved with sort of what you're known for, and that's producing these regional documentaries along the way, and especially the Germans from Russia. But can you just keep going with that now?
Okay, yeah, there are two kind of separate things there with the Germans from Russia. But so Larry around 1990, 91, said, Bob, you're going to be in charge, executive producer of everything we do. Whether it be the on-air political debates, whether it be anything that you do, the full-length documentaries, the episodic programs we were doing like Prairie News Journal, you're the executive producer of that. So I had to get involved in a lot of different things. In 1991, he said, well, is there anything you'd like to do? And I said, well, I know there's a grant we can get up from the Winnipeg Foundation for maybe producing a show up in Winnipeg. So I had an idea. I'd been up to Winnipeg numerous times and always was intrigued by the Exchange District, all the beautiful old buildings up there. So we went to Winnipeg and applied for a grant from the Winnipeg Foundation. And they came back and said, well, good news is you get the grant. Not so much bad news, but the other part of the news is that you have to work with a fellow up here who applied for almost the same grant. So I remember going up to the Delta, Winnipeg. It was a cold, cold day. And I said, oh, man, I'm going to have to walk from a downtown hotel, the Exchange District, where this fellow had his office. And I was dreading that, and I was dreading, how do I deal with this guy I don't know? Talked to him once on the phone. And so I go in this fella's office and we talk a while, and that was George Siamandis, who has been a co-producer on numerous shows for us over the years and become one of my best friends of all time. But I remember that was 1991, and that was the Exchange District, Pyramids on the Prairie, my first full-length documentary, television documentary. I had done some short features, but nothing of that scope before. And George and I worked on that, and I said that became really the blueprint for a lot of things we did after that, which in 1996, when Kathleen was here, Pavelko, our general manager, she said she wanted to switch from things like Hablemos, which was running out, and Prairie News Journal, and start doing one-offs, which are 1 hour long or half-hour long documentaries of cultural and historical nature. And so she threw that in my lap and said, we want to do them. You don't have any budget, go out and find funding for them. And so that's about what I did. That was the early 90s, and we were able to come up with a number of great partners, which we couldn't do them without, whether it be the Germans from Russia, or ones that we've done with Michael Miller and the German-Russian Historical Societies, and the NDSU libraries, the North Dakota Humanities, North Dakota Arts Council. I'm going to leave something out, the ERC. You know, we've just had so many. North Dakota Department of Transportation, which we did one with, actually two with, which were the Old Red Trail projects that we did, which were a lot of fun that we did in the late 90s. And all of these have come about really because of relationships that we've had in the community, people suggesting programs, people here saying, why don't we do a show about something, outside people coming to us and asking us if we could produce a show. And often I say, I'd love to, but where are we going to get the money for? And then working with those organizations to see if we can put funding packages together. People probably don't realize, John, I know you do, we have a very limited local production budget. Just a small fraction of what we actually produce is produced on our yearly budget. And we go out and find partners to raise money and be able to produce those shows. And you know, a documentary here can cost anywhere from $35,000 to $40,000 to $250,000, $350,000, $400,000, depending upon the nature of it, the travel involved, and what we have to do. So yeah, it's been fun, but it's been a challenge. I haven't talked about the Germans from Russia, and that's the one I need to talk about. So it was about 1990, would have been 94. So it was the winter of 94, and we were getting together. My wife is still development director here at Virginia, and we were getting together to put together as a premium for the Lawrence Welk Show, a Lawrence Welk calendar that would be produced here and then used by stations across the country as a premium during membership drives. So Michael Miller was in my living room, and it was football season. And so as we all do in football season, I don't have a circular house. I was going from my TV room through the room in the living room where Michael and Virginia were visiting, into the kitchen to get something and back. So every time I would make that trip, Michael would say something like, I'd really like to do a documentary with you. Okay. He'd say, it's going to be on the Germans from Russia. So, okay. Do you have a passport? Yeah, I do. You're coming on a trip with me. So that set up our first trip actually to the Ukraine, myself and Dave Geck, our videographer at the time. We went to the Ukraine and gathered a boatload of footage. And that eventually appeared as our first Germans from Russia documentary, Children of the Steppe, Children of the Prairie. So this is 94, 95, we're having this talk. That premiered in 1999. Michael and I spent that ensuing period raising dollars. I say dollars because it was not tens of thousands of dollars. It was often $100 and $1,000 at a time, raising money to fund that first Germans from Russia documentary. And I'm speaking out of school a little bit here, but I remember we were at a convention once and a German-Russian raised his hand and he said to me, he said, if you just got $1 from every German from Russia, we could fund this documentary in no time. And I said, the hardest thing in the world there is to get $1 out of someone, a German from Russia. They all laughed, and then a few of them came forward. But, you know, it is true. You're trying to raise something $1 at a time, or a small amount at a time, does take a long amount of time to raise dollars. And some of our documentaries, for numerous reasons, go, you know, it takes 3-4 years to raise money. Sometimes we can turn around in a few months. It just depends.
Yeah. Well, Bob, we got about 4 minutes left.
Okay.
Just giving you some time there. But what are some of the high points in your career? Who you worked with or projects you worked on?
You know, it's trying to name your babies. Of course, the first one, Pyramids on the Prairie, will always have a special place. I think our first documentary we did with Michael and the Germans from Russia, my favorite was Schmeckfest, if nothing else for the title. That was our first food traditions of the Germans from Russia. That was a lot of fun to do. Really great show. Had a lot of good response to it. First ones we've done with our trip to Iceland with Wayne Goodmanson, when we did our Emmy Award-winning actually project on Wayne and Considered View. That was a wonderful trip and a wonderful documentary. Documentaries we've done with the Energy and Environmental Research Center up at Grand Forks. I think we've done 8 of them with them on numerous topics. Great people to travel with. Our arts councils and our humanities councils here in North Dakota have always been good to work with. And then it's really been great that we've got the funding from Minnesota through the Heritage Legacy Grant over there that has really allowed us to start to do some really great shows. And it's been fun doing Prairie Mosaic as well. Yeah, I missed 10, let me tell you.
Well, Bob, you know, we announced here that you're a former, but and you're retiring from full-time work. Tell the folks a little bit about, you're going to stick around for a few months working on a project or two. Can you?
Yeah, well, we have one more Germans from Russia project, if you can believe it, our 10th documentary. It's called Women Behind the Plow. It's about really the changing role of women in agriculture over the past 80 years, I would say. And we are just finishing the interview portion of that, so we're going to get into the rough cut stage, the narrative editing stage, and hopefully better be ready for the German-Russian Convention in July in Fargo. And then I'm helping out on a couple other projects that we're working on here. And looking forward to it, and looking forward to spending some time with our grandkids.
Yeah. Well, Bob, why is public television still important in your mind?
All I have to do is look at my grandkids, just like I looked at my kids. And I know what public television, everything from Mr. Rogers to Sesame Street meant for my children. And I see it now in my grandchildren. But as my grandchildren are even getting a little bit older, a couple of them, the documentaries that they get to see, the tremendous documentaries we get to see. And then the dramas, you know, I still watch Masterpiece Theater. I don't like all of them, but I watch a lot of them. Love the mysteries that we have here, nature science programming. Frontline, there's still not a better documentary series than Frontline out there. And then the stuff we're able to do locally that no one else is doing. And I think that's a real footprint for us here, Prairie Public, is that we are able to present really a window on our local world here. That, you know, we show artists, no one else is showing these artists, and we're able to do that. We have documentaries, history documentaries about history subjects that no one else is covering. And I know you'll continue to do that in the future, and that's why it's so important.
Well, Bob, if people want more information or want to find your documentaries, where's the best place to go?
The Prairie Public YouTube page is super. We have just about everything. I got to compliment one of our great workers here, Kim Stencham, who retired about a year ago. But Kim, before she left for retirement, made sure that we were current at that time, getting every one of our local productions that we could have onto YouTube so people can watch them, and whether there are short features or full-length documentaries.
Thank you for everything you've done for Prairie Public and the people of North Dakota.
Thank you, John.
Stay tuned for more. The Becker County Museum recently held a cemetery walk at Exshow Lutheran Church near Lake Park, Minnesota. This is an opportunity for people to come to graves and then see and hear from a reenactor who plays the part of the person buried there. They take on the character and are often related to them in some way, adding a personal touch to this unique outing.
Well, you know, I'm not that interesting a person, to be real honest, but I'll tell you. My family came here when I was 5. We were farmers in the middle of Sweden in Värmland, and we had just a tiny little farm, and my father had brothers. There was no hope for a future there. So they decided in 1870 that they were going to come to America. They were following a friend of theirs, and so in 1871 we began the trip. Christine Anderson Johnson is my great-grandmother.
So the Extra Cemetery Walk was done to raise awareness of those that were buried in the cemetery. It is not meant to be a scary experience. We want the people that are buried there we all have a story in life, and we want to feature that story. And in the instance of Exshow, the church was very willing to participate and help with the event. We did it in conjunction with their midsummer celebration. And so we were fortunate that many of the people who were portraying those that were buried there were either a relative or a friend or knew them. Perhaps they even went to church with them, which gives the person that's coming to the cemetery walk an extra experience. It goes to a deeper level of the knowledge of those individuals. Everybody does it a little bit different. With those that are portraying characters, we have found that some really want to become that person, but usually what happens is, yes, they dress up to portray that person to the best of the ability, and then they become that person. So you come up to the grave, and they would say, I am Olaf B. Anderson, and my story is, and they start to talk about that. They're not dead, so they don't talk about the way they die.
I was born in 1875, just outside of Lake Park here. I was the pharmacist here.
I was born on March 26, 1911, in Moorhead, Minnesota. My parents, Dr. Louis and Annie Nelson, died when I was a very young boy, so I was raised by my aunt and uncle, John and Julia Nelson of Lake Park.
Well, it was brought up that they're looking for people to be portrayed at the cemetery walk. First off, it was my mother, who was a teacher in a one-room schoolhouse. And secondly, the fact that my father was her student, later to become her husband, became an item of interest. And then when it comes to the idea of who's going to portray my father, I thought, well, it is my job. That is what I should do. I was born in Dale, and to Martin and Helga Rusted, and I lived on the north side of the Buffalo River, and I was Norwegian. I was Norwegian, full-blood Norwegian. I went to school at District 41, where I met this teacher, Mabel Rosell, and Mabel and I, we farmed there, we had dairy there, and she continued to teach. At that time, she went to Hitterdal to teach in grade school. I continued to farm. As I approached retirement, I went back to Hawley and became a rural mail carrier.
I would say generally, we have a little bit of a mix. This is the second cemetery walk we've done. Our first cemetery walk, we focused a lot on people who had settled the Detroit Lakes area. This cemetery walk there was a couple of individuals that had started the church and raised money to start this church. One of the individuals had the church start in their home. But then there's always a few also that we portray that maybe didn't have super glorified lives. They were pretty average citizens. And it's really to drive the point home that we all have a story.
Everyone's got a story that's important to the community. I think a lot of people think big when they think of stories. They think of like Anne Frank or something like that. And it's like, if you didn't have all these people contributing to the community, you really wouldn't have the community as it is.
I did not realize that she had come that young and that she was a charter member of the church until we first started this process. And my mom was like, well, you know, my grandmother was one of the charter members. The most interesting thing to me actually was the fact that she was 31 years old when she got married and started having children at 36. I think that had to be fairly remarkable for that time period. You know, I was a history major in college. It's always been an interest of mine. That's the part that I liked about it. And we tried, when we found the people for our cemetery walk, to get a wide variety of time. So we had some of those original members, but we also had people who had passed within the last 20 years.
It's a good way for us to represent our past with living with us. You know, we're relating our own history, and like you say, we're learning just by digging into the past. But also it shows what a diversified group of people started this church. And it was there's people that were businessmen, they were pharmacists, they were farmers, they were from every walk of life.
The Cemetery Walks and the outreach program that we do is a really great way for us as a museum to get outside of our walls and get out into the community and bring history alive in a new way that is perhaps relatable on a more personal level than just coming into the museum and looking at exhibits.
Well, it was a hard life. There was a lot of work to be done at all times, and we were farmers. It wasn't like I sat in the house and drank coffee with my friends very often. But when the work was done, we had good friends, we had good times.
Well, that's all we have on Prairie Post for this week. And as always, thanks for watching.
Funding for Minnesota Legacy programs are provided by a grant from the Minnesota Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund, with money from the vote of the people of Minnesota on November 4th, 2008, and by the members of Prairie Public.